Mike wiped the sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on his latest project. His garage workshop was his happy place. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and the concrete floor was swept clean despite the constant work that happened there. After 15 years in Oakwood Estates, he turned this space into something special. The neighborhood had been peaceful for most of those years. People minded their own business, helped each other when needed, and the HOA stayed reasonable. That is, until now. Mike took a swig from his water bottle and glanced out the garage window. Across the street, a moving truck was pulling away from the house that had been on the market for nearly 6 months. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a sold sticker that someone had forgotten to remove. Hope they're decent folks, Mike mumbled to himself. As a mechanical engineer who specialized in heavy equipment, he appreciated neighbors who didn't complain about the occasional odd noise from his garage. 2 days later, Mike was trimming his hedges when a woman marched up his driveway. She wore pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Oakwood Estates logo embroidered on the chest. Her hair was cut in that specific way that seemed designed for asking to speak to managers. "Hello there," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Deborah Wilson, just moved in across the street." Mike set down his trimmers and wiped his hands on his jeans before extending one. "Mike Shen, welcome to the neighborhood." Deborah ignored his hand. Instead, she pulled out a small notebook. "I've just been elected to the HOA board, and I'm doing an initial assessment of the street. I notice your trash bins are visible from the road. According to Bylaw 17.3, they should be stored out of sight except on collection days." Mike blinked. "They're behind the fence. You can only see them if you stand at that exact angle and really look for them." "Rules are rules," she said, writing something down. "You've got 2 weeks to correct the issue before it goes to the violations committee." She smiled again, that same empty smile. "Just doing my part to keep property values up. Have a nice day." As she walked away, Mike's next-door neighbor Tom poked his head over the fence. "I see you've met our new HOA dragon." "That was something," Mike replied. "Everyone's calling her Karen already," Tom whispered. "Yesterday she left a notice on my door because my garden hose wasn't coiled in an aesthetically pleasing manner." Over the next few days, Mike watched as Deborah made her rounds through the neighborhood. She'd walk slowly, taking photos with her phone and making notes. Sometimes she'd knock on doors, always leaving the homeowner looking confused or annoyed. At the monthly community barbecue, Mike overheard snippets of conversation about the new board member. "She measured my grass with a ruler. Told me my wind chimes violated the noise ordinance," reported the Rodriguez family for having a basketball hoop. Mike tried to be fair. Maybe she was just overzealous and would calm down after settling in. Everyone deserved a chance, right? That thinking lasted exactly 1 week. Monday morning, Mike had an important client meeting. He'd prepared for days, set his alarm early, and had his presentation materials ready to go. He stepped out his front door at 7:15 a.m., travel mug of coffee in hand, briefcase ready, and stopped dead in his tracks. There, perfectly positioned to block his driveway, sat a gleaming white Mercedes. From where he stood, Mike could see the custom license plate, DBOIH1. His jaw tightened. He set down his coffee and briefcase on the front step and walked toward the car, fishing out his phone to take photos. This wasn't an accidental parking job. The car was positioned in the exact center of his driveway entrance, making it impossible for him to back out without hitting it. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, already dialing Deborah's number from the community directory he'd received years ago. As the phone rang without answer, Mike realized this was just the beginning of his troubles with the new neighbor from hell. Mike pressed the button on the control unit, and the hydraulic system hummed to life. Slowly, Deborah's white Mercedes began to descend from its 10-foot perch. The crowd watched in silence as the car inched downward, finally settling gently onto the pavement with a soft bump. As soon as the car touched the ground, Deborah rushed forward, inspecting every inch of it for damage. Finding none, she turned to Mike with narrowed eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed, loud enough for only him to hear. "The board will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Mike replied calmly. 3 days later, the community center was packed for the emergency HOA meeting. Every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls. No one wanted to miss what was sure to be the most interesting HOA meeting in Oakwood Estates history. Bill called the meeting to order, looking nervous as he faced the unusually large crowd. "We're here to discuss the incident that occurred this past Saturday involving Mr. Chen and Ms. Wilson." Deborah immediately stood up, clutching a thick folder. "I have documented numerous violations committed by Mr. Chen, including vandalism, harassment, and unauthorized use of mechanical equipment in a residential area. I move that we fine him the maximum amount and place a line on his property if he refuses to pay." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bill looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Mr. Chen, would you like to respond?" Mike stood up, holding a much thinner folder. "I only have one thing to share with the board and my neighbors." He pulled out his phone and connected it to the projector at the front of the room. "This is footage from my security camera over the past month." The video began to play on the large screen. It showed a time-lapse of Mike's driveway over several weeks, compressed into a few minutes. Again and again, Deborah's car appeared, blocking the driveway for 20 to 30 minutes before disappearing. The timestamps in the corner showed different days and times, but the pattern was clear. "I'd highlighted 7 separate incidents," Mike explained, "including the final one, which happened on the morning of my sister's wedding when I was giving her away." The room had gone completely silent. "I tried calling Ms. Wilson each time. I tried contacting the HOA office. I tried calling towing companies. No one could help because of various HOA restrictions." Mike looked around the room. "So yes, I found a solution that didn't damage anyone's property but did make a point." An older resident in the back raised his hand. "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never heard of anyone repeatedly blocking someone's driveway." "What exactly were you doing at Mr. Chen's house all those times, Deborah?" Deborah's face flushed. "Conducting inspections of violations, of course." At 5 a.m., someone else called out. "On a Saturday." Tom stood up next. "I've seen you taking photos of Mike's house at odd hours. That goes beyond HOA duties. That's harassment." More voices joined in, sharing their own stories of Deborah's overzealous enforcement. The Rodriguez family described how she'd reported their children's basketball hoop within hours of it being installed. Mrs. Patel explained how Deborah had measured the height of her garden flowers with a ruler, then left a violation notice because they were 2 inches taller than the guidelines allowed. Bill cleared his throat loudly. "It seems we have a larger issue to address here. I propose we form a committee to review our current enforcement procedures and create clearer guidelines for board members." A woman near the front raised her hand. "I move that we first vote on removing Ms. Wilson from her position as head of the Violations Committee, effective immediately." "I second that," called out at least 5 voices at once. The vote was quick and decisive. Deborah was removed from her position, and a new committee was formed to review the HOA bylaws and enforcement procedures. Mike was asked to join the committee, along with Tom and several other neighbors. The next few weeks turned into a bizarre game of cat and mouse between Mike and Deborah. Mike would need to leave for work, and somehow, Deborah's white Mercedes would appear blocking his driveway. Never for long, just 20 or 30 minutes, but always when it would cause the most trouble. It happened when he had doctor appointments. It happened when he was supposed to meet friends for dinner. It even happened when he was heading out to help his elderly dad with some home repairs. "This is getting ridiculous," Mike told his neighbor Tom over the fence one evening. "It's like she watches my house and waits for me to need to leave." Tom scratched his chin. "You know, I caught her looking through your trash last week. Said she was checking for proper waste separation or some nonsense." Mike shook his head. "That's crossing a line." "Tell me about it." "My kid's birthday party is this weekend." Mike circled the date on his calendar with a red marker. His sister Lisa's wedding was coming up this Saturday, and he was giving her away. Their parents had passed away years ago, and as her only family, Mike had to be there on time. No excuses. "I swear, if Deborah pulls anything that day," he muttered to himself, tapping the calendar with his pen. For the next few days, Mike prepared meticulously. He got his suit dry cleaned and hung it in his bedroom. He polished his dress shoes until he could see his reflection. He even got a haircut 2 days before, just to be safe. On Friday night, he packed everything in his car, the wedding gift, his overnight bag, and an emergency kit with a spare tie and shirt, just in case. He set 3 alarms on his phone and went to bed early, determined to leave by 5 a.m. for the 3-hour drive to the venue. At 4:30 a.m., Mike was already up, showered, and dressed. He sipped his coffee in the kitchen, checking the time every few minutes. The ceremony wasn't until noon, but Lisa had asked him to be there by 9 a.m. for photos and last-minute preparations. Almost time, he said to himself, rinsing his mug in the sink. He grabbed his keys and headed for the garage, feeling confident that even Deborah wouldn't be up this early to cause trouble. The garage door hummed as it rolled up. Mike froze, his hand still on the wall switch. There, perfectly centered in front of his driveway, sat Deborah's white Mercedes. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He rushed outside in his suit, the cool morning air hitting his face. Sure enough, the car was empty and positioned in a way that made it impossible for him to get around it. Mike ran to Deborah's house and pounded on the door. No answer. He pressed the doorbell repeatedly. Nothing. Her house was dark and silent. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called her number. It went straight to voicemail. "This is Deborah Wilson. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message, and I'll return your call during business hours." "Deborah, this is Mike Shen. Your car is blocking my driveway again, and I have a family emergency. Please move it immediately." He knew she wouldn't, but he needed the record of having called. He tried the other HOA board members. 2 didn't answer. 1 picked up, sounding groggy. "Frank, I'm sorry to call so early, but Deborah has blocked my driveway again, and I need to leave for my sister's wedding." "Have you tried calling Deborah?" Frank asked, yawning. "Yes, she's not answering. Can you help me?" "I don't have a key to her car, Mike. Maybe try the police." Mike called the local police station's non-emergency line. "This is Officer Reynolds. How can I help you?" Mike explained the situation, his voice growing more desperate. "I'm sorry, sir, but since this is on private property governed by an HOA, it's considered a civil matter. We can send someone out to file a report, but we can't tow the vehicle without HOA authorization." "How long will that take?" "Honestly, given how busy we are this morning, probably 2 to 3 hours." Mike checked his watch. It was 5:15 a.m. Even if the police came immediately, he'd miss the wedding. He tried 3 different towing companies. All gave the same answer. They needed HOA approval to tow from Oakwood Estates. Mike sat on his front step, still holding his phone, and watched the sky lighten. The seconds ticked by on his watch. 5:30 a.m. Then 5:45. His window for making it to the wedding on time was closing fast. He called Lisa. "Hey, big brother," she answered cheerfully. "You on your way?" Mike's throat tightened. "Lisa, I'm having car trouble." He couldn't bring himself to explain the real situation and ruin her day. "I might be a little late." "Oh no, but you'll make it for the ceremony, right?" "I can't walk down the aisle without you." "I'm going to do everything I can," he promised. "You focus on getting ready. It's your day." After they hung up, Mike stood in his driveway staring at Deborah's car. The morning sun glinted off its polished surface, almost mocking him. This wasn't just inconvenient anymore. This was cruel. This was deliberately trying to ruin one of the most important days of his sister's life. Something inside Mike changed in that moment. The frustration and anger of the past weeks crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. He wasn't just going to solve this problem. He was going to solve it in a way Deborah would never forget. He turned and walked back to his garage, his mind already working through calculations and possibilities. As an engineer who specialized in heavy equipment, he suddenly realized he had everything he needed right here. Mike stood in his garage, surveying his equipment with new eyes. For the past 6 months, he'd been working on a custom hydraulic lift system for his workshop. It was designed to raise heavy machinery for easier repairs, engines, industrial equipment, that sort of thing. But today, it would serve a different purpose. "This could actually work," he muttered, running his hand along the steel frame. The system consisted of 4 powerful hydraulic jacks connected to a control unit. Mike had built it himself, using parts ordered online and some salvaged from his workplace's scrap pile. He tested it last weekend with his own car, and it had easily lifted the vehicle 3 feet off the ground. Mike glanced at his watch. 6:10 a.m. He still had time to make it to the wedding if he worked fast. He'd wheeled the hydraulic system out of his garage, the metal frame rattling slightly on the concrete driveway. A few early morning joggers passed by, giving him curious looks. Mike nodded and smiled, as if it was perfectly normal to be moving heavy equipment while wearing a suit at dawn. "Just doing some quick maintenance," he called to his neighbor Tom, who had stepped onto his porch in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. Tom took in the scene, Mike in his wedding suit, the hydraulic lift, Deborah's car blocking the driveway, and slowly raised his mug in a silent toast before retreating back inside. No questions asked. Mike positioned the lift carefully around Deborah's Mercedes. The system had 4 lift points, designed to cradle a vehicle safely without causing damage. He spent extra time making sure everything was aligned perfectly. Whatever he was about to do, he didn't want to harm her car. That would cross a line he wasn't willing to cross. Once the lift points were in place, Mike connected the control unit and double-checked all the hydraulic lines. Everything looked good. He took a deep breath and pressed the power button. The machine hummed to life, a quiet whirring sound that seemed too gentle for the power it contained. Mike checked his watch again, 6:25 a.m., and then pressed the lift button. With a soft hiss, the hydraulic system began to raise Deborah's car. 1 inch, 2 inches, 6 inches. The Mercedes rose smoothly into the air, perfectly balanced on the lift points. Mike had originally planned to lift it just enough to move his own car out, maybe 2 feet at most. But as he watched the white sedan rising higher, a different idea took shape. "Why stop there?" he said to himself. He kept his finger on the button. The car rose higher, 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet off the ground. At 10 feet, Mike released the button. The Mercedes now hovered in midair, safely suspended but completely inaccessible. He double-checked the stability of the system, making sure it was locked in place and couldn't lower without the control unit, which he would take with him. Satisfied, he grabbed a notepad from his garage and wrote a quick message. He climbed up on a stepladder to place it under the Mercedes windshield wiper. "Can't elevated for safety reasons. Will be lowered upon my return. For emergency assistance, please contact the HOA board." Mike added Deborah's own phone number at the bottom, the one she had printed on all her violation notices. By now, a few more neighbors had noticed the floating car. Mrs. Puttle from 2 doors down stood in her driveway in her bathrobe, mouth open. The Liu family across the street had come out to stare, their young son pointing and laughing. "Morning, folks," Mike called cheerfully, putting the stepladder back in his garage. He straightened his tie, grabbed the control unit, and disconnected it from the system. The hydraulic lift would stay locked in position until he returned. Mike got into his car, which he could now easily back out since Deborah's vehicle was suspended safely above. He rolled down his window as he passed Tom, who was back on his porch taking photos with his phone. "If anyone needs me, I'll be at my sister's wedding," Mike said. "Should be back around 8 p.m. "Don't worry," Tom replied with a grin. "I'll keep an eye on things here. Wouldn't want to miss what happens next." As Mike drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The white Mercedes hung in the air like a bizarre art installation, gleaming in the morning sun. For the first time in weeks, Mike felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned on the radio and began the drive to Lisa's wedding, wondering what Deborah's face would look like when she discovered her floating car. Lisa's wedding was beautiful. Mike walked her down the aisle right on time, and no one except him knew about the morning's drama. During the reception, his phone buzzed constantly with text messages and photos from his neighbors, but he ignored them until the cake was cut and the formal dances were over. Finally, while sipping champagne at his table, Mike checked his messages. What he saw nearly made him spit out his drink. There were at least 30 messages from different neighbors, all with photos of Deborah standing beneath her floating car. In the first few pictures, taken around 8 a.m., she looked confused. By 9 a.m., confusion had turned to outrage. The latest photos showed her surrounded by various officials, a police officer, someone from a towing company, and what looked like the fire chief. Tom had sent the most detailed updates. She found it at 7:45, called police at 8:10. They showed up at 8:30 but said they couldn't do anything because the car isn't technically blocking anything and isn't damaged. She's furious. Another text from Tom. Towing company just left. The guy laughed and said he has no equipment to get a car down from that height. Told her to call a crane operator. A message from Mrs. Patel. Fire department came and left. Said they don't use their ladders for non-emergencies. Told her to wait for you to come back. The neighborhood kids had apparently set up a small concession stand selling lemonade and cookies to the growing crowd of spectators. Someone had even brought lawn chairs to sit and watch the show. By mid-afternoon, Tom reported that Deborah had called an emergency HOA board meeting right there on the street, but only 2 members showed up, and neither had any ideas about how to get the car down. Everyone keeps asking her why your driveway was blocked in the first place, Tom texted. She keeps changing the subject. Mike smiled to himself. He had expected Deborah to be angry, but he hadn't anticipated the public spectacle this would become. He put his phone away and focused on enjoying the rest of his sister's wedding. When Mike finally drove home that evening, just after 8 p.m., the scene that greeted him was beyond anything he could have imagined. At least 20 neighbors were still gathered around, some sitting in lawn chairs, others standing in small groups chatting. Someone had brought a portable speaker and was playing Up, Up and Away as he pulled into view. And there, in the center of it all, was Deborah. She'd been waiting for over 12 hours, her perfect hair now disheveled, her face sunburned from standing outside all day. When she spotted Mike's car, she marched toward him, a stack of papers clutched in her hand. "Mr. Chen," she shouted as he stepped out of his car. "This is vandalism, harassment, destruction of property. I've documented everything for the police and the HOA." Mike nodded calmly. "Actually, your car hasn't been vandalized or damaged in any way. It's been safely elevated using professional equipment, and it hasn't destroyed any property. In fact, it's not even touching the ground." The crowd of neighbors murmured and chuckled. "You had no right," Deborah sputtered. "Just like you had no right to block my driveway on the morning of my sister's wedding," Mike replied evenly. "Or the 6 other times you've done it in the past month." A police officer who had apparently returned to the scene stepped forward. "Ma'am, as I explained earlier, this is a civil matter between neighbors. There's no damage to your vehicle, and technically it's not being held against your will. It's just elevated." "I want it down now," Deborah demanded, turning back to Mike. "Of course," Mike said pleasantly. He walked to his garage and returned with the control unit. "I'd be happy to lower your car right away." As he approached the hydraulic system, he paused. The neighbors had gone quiet, watching intently. Even the police officer seemed curious about how this would end. "But first," Mike said, turning to address not just Deborah, but everyone gathered there, "I think we should talk about parking etiquette in our neighborhood, and maybe about how the HOA handles residents' concerns." Deborah's face flushed red, but for the first time since Mike had met her, she seemed at a loss for words. She glanced around at the crowd, suddenly aware that every neighbor was watching, and most were not on her side. The HOA president, Bill, who had apparently arrived recently, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this at the next official meeting. In the meantime, Mike, if you could please lower Ms. Wilson's car." Mike nodded and connected the control unit. "Happy to. Just wanted to make sure we all understand each other going forward." Mike pressed the button on the control unit, and the hydraulic system hummed to life. Slowly, Deborah's white Mercedes began to descend from its 10-foot perch. The crowd watched in silence as the car inched downward, finally settling gently onto the pavement with a soft bump. As soon as the car touched the ground, Deborah rushed forward, inspecting every inch of it for damage. Finding none, she turned to Mike with narrowed eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed, loud enough for only him to hear. "The board will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Mike replied calmly. 3 days later, the community center was packed for the emergency HOA meeting. Every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls. No one wanted to miss what was sure to be the most interesting HOA meeting in Oakwood Estates history. Bill called the meeting to order, looking nervous as he faced the unusually large crowd. "We're here to discuss the incident that occurred this past Saturday involving Mr. Chen and Ms. Wilson." Deborah immediately stood up, clutching a thick folder. "I have documented numerous violations committed by Mr. Chen, including vandalism, harassment, and unauthorized use of mechanical equipment in a residential area. I move that we fine him the maximum amount and place a line on his property if he refuses to pay." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bill looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Mr. Chen, would you like to respond?" Mike stood up, holding a much thinner folder. "I only have one thing to share with the board and my neighbors." He pulled out his phone and connected it to the projector at the front of the room. "This is footage from my security camera over the past month." The video began to play on the large screen. It showed a time-lapse of Mike's driveway over several weeks, compressed into a few minutes. Again and again, Deborah's car appeared, blocking the driveway for 20 to 30 minutes before disappearing. The timestamps in the corner showed different days and times, but the pattern was clear. "I'd highlighted 7 separate incidents," Mike explained, "including the final one, which happened on the morning of my sister's wedding when I was giving her away. The room had gone completely silent. I tried calling Ms. Wilson each time. I tried contacting the HOA office. I tried calling towing companies. No one could help because of various HOA restrictions." Mike looked around the room. "So yes, I found a solution that didn't damage anyone's property but did make a point." An older resident in the back raised his hand. "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never heard of anyone repeatedly blocking someone's driveway." "What exactly were you doing at Mr. Chen's house all those times, Deborah?" Deborah's face flushed. "Conducting inspections of violations, of course." "At 5 a.m., someone else called out. On a Saturday." Tom stood up next. "I've seen you taking photos of Mike's house at odd hours. That goes beyond HOA duties. That's harassment." More voices joined in, sharing their own stories of Deborah's overzealous enforcement. The Rodriguez family described how she'd reported their children's basketball hoop within hours of it being installed. Mrs. Patel explained how Deborah had measured the height of her garden flowers with a ruler, then left a violation notice because they were 2 inches taller than the guidelines allowed. Bill cleared his throat loudly. "It seems we have a larger issue to address here. I propose we form a committee to review our current enforcement procedures and create clearer guidelines for board members." A woman near the front raised her hand. "I move that we first vote on removing Ms. Wilson from her position as head of the Violations Committee, effective immediately." "I second that," called out at least 5 voices at once. The vote was quick and decisive. Deborah was removed from her position, and a new committee was formed to review the HOA bylaws and enforcement procedures. Mike was asked to join the committee, along with Tom and several other neighbors. After the meeting, people lingered in small groups, chatting and laughing. Several neighbors stopped to shake Mike's hand or pat him on the back. "That was quite a solution you engineered," Bill said, approaching Mike with an embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry the board didn't take your complaints seriously before." "It's okay," Mike replied. "Sometimes you need to lift things up to see the problems underneath." In the months that followed, Oakwood Estates changed. The revised HOA guidelines emphasized community well-being over rigid enforcement. Neighbors started talking to each other instead of filing complaints. Even Deborah gradually became less confrontational, though she still avoided Mike at community events. As for Mike's reputation, it took on an almost mythical quality. New HOA board members were quietly taken aside and told about that guy who can lift cars into the air. It served as an effective reminder that sometimes the people you're trying to control might have skills you haven't considered. No one ever blocked Mike's driveway again,